because it is a long journey to this moment.
In 1964, at the height of Hollywood's golden era, Sidney Poitier stood out among countless talented actors and claimed the year's highest honor, the Best Actor Oscar. He was the first Black actor to win that. His performance not only captivated audiences at the time, but reserved his place as one of the most iconic figures in film history.
The persistence and effort and determination of young people of color.
Though Poitier has since passed on, his influence and legacy remain unshakable. But before his death, he made a surprising revelation, naming 5 actors he hated the most. In this video, we're sharing with you these 5 actors he hated the most. And you know what? The person in the number 2 spot is someone you'd never expect to be on Sidney Poitier's bad side for the given reason. So, let's dive in. Starting with number 5, Paul Robeson.
My father slaved there. Upon the backs of my people was developed the primary wealth of America.
In the history of Black artistry and activism, few names command the reverence of Paul Robeson. Yet, behind the public praise and mutual respect between Poitier and Robeson lay a silent clash of philosophies. It was like 2 men on the same battlefield, wielding vastly different weapons. Poitier once said in an interview, "Paul Robeson was one of the most remarkable men I'd ever met, but sometimes his voice was so loud it left no room for others to speak."
I found him to be overwhelming in his knowledge.
It was not hatred, never that, but there was a tension, an unspoken recognition that Robeson's fire could burn allies as easily as enemies. The friction first became apparent in the early 1950s. America was gripped by McCarthyism, and fear of association with the wrong people could end a career overnight. An NBC executive once claimed, Sidney was told flat out, "If you want to work, distance yourself from Robeson." Poitier had a dilemma. According to one crew member on set, he walked out of the meeting pale and confused. From then onwards, it gradually became obvious that a strain had come into their relationship, even though they looked seemingly close. But the admiration had limits. Robeson's political stance was uncompromising. He condemned American racism with the force of a hammer and rejected any call for Black soldiers to fight for a country that denied them dignity. He spoke warmly of socialist ideals and was unafraid to defend the Soviet Union at the height of Cold War hysteria. Harry Belafonte, who moved between both worlds, allegedly remarked, "Sid admired Paul's courage, but he feared his rigidity. Sidney played chess. Paul played with dynamite." Poitier's revolution was quiet but no less dangerous. He accepted roles that redefined how America saw Black men: educated, dignified, morally upright. A Hollywood insider once whispered, "Sidney was the Trojan horse. He got inside the gates before they realized he wasn't playing by their rules. He sought to dismantle prejudice from the inside, one nuanced performance at a time." To Robeson, this sometimes looked like compromise. One rumored account from a Harlem cafe has Robeson telling a young actor, "Sidney wants to please the gatekeepers. I want to tear the gates down." Poitier, upon hearing this later, is said to have responded quietly, "If the gates come down too soon, the city will bury us both." Friends noticed the subtle distance between them. One recalled seeing them at a dinner party, Robeson animated, gesturing wildly about political revolution, while Poitier sat listening, polite but reserved. "It was like watching fire and ice share the same table," the friend later said. Yet, despite their differences, the bond between the 2 actors was never extremely broken. When asked late in life about Robeson, Poitier's eyes reportedly responded by saying that they were different men with different missions, but the road I walked could have been burned by Robeson's flame. In the end, theirs was not just a story of conflict, but of 2 giants navigating the same storm by opposite stars, one shouting into the wind, the other charting a silent course through it. Number 4, Rod Steiger.
It's as painful in a way as any physical disease.
Rod Steiger was not just another actor. He was a force. From the moment he came onto the screen in the 1950s, his presence was undeniable. Critics hailed him as one of the most fearless performers of his generation, a man who could inhabit a character so completely that audiences forgot they were watching an actor at all. His Oscar-winning turn in the Heat of the Night and his unforgettable performances in On the Waterfront and The Pawnbroker cemented him as a master of emotional depth and raw intensity. Steiger built his reputation on a devotion to method acting that bordered on obsession. He studied under the best at the Actors Studio, embracing the philosophy that an actor must live and breathe the role to find its truth. When Sidney Poitier and Rod Steiger first stepped onto the set of In the Heat of the Night, the atmosphere was electric. Two men at the top of their craft, yet as different in their approaches as fire and water. Poitier came prepared, precise, every line and gesture carefully considered. Steiger arrived with the restless energy of a man who lived inside his characters, carrying their moods between takes like a second skin. Observers noticed the contrast almost immediately. Steiger's process was messy, raw, and unpredictable. He would mutter to himself before the cameras rolled, pacing, eyes fixed on some invisible point in the distance. Crew members whispered about how he sometimes stayed in character long after a scene ended, his emotions spilling over into off-camera conversations. Poitier, by comparison, was calm, deliberate, his control over his performance almost surgical. The contrast between the two was impossible to miss. Their differences created a unique tension during filming. Steiger would push for extra takes, chasing fleeting moments of raw truth that he believed only emerged when actors were pushed past their comfort zones. Poitier, however, preferred to get it right in fewer takes, believing that overworking a scene risked losing its precision. Observers said the unspoken push and pull between them was like watching two master craftsmen argue silently through their work. During intense scenes, their differences were magnified. Steiger would push for more takes, chasing an elusive truth he felt only appeared in moments of exhaustion or frustration. Poitier resisted, preferring to hit the emotional note with clarity, then step back before overworking it. Those watching sensed a kind of tension, an unspoken challenge between them, though neither man seemed to back down. Behind the scenes, people spoke about the unique dynamic they brought to their roles. Steiger's unpredictability forced Poitier to stay alert, never fully certain how his scene partner would deliver a line. Poitier's steadiness, in turn, anchored Steiger's wild energy, keeping the scenes from veering into chaos. Some believed this push and pull gave their on-screen chemistry its unforgettable edge. It wasn't personal animosity, it was the collision of two artistic worlds. Steiger carried his character like a burden, even during lunch breaks, while Poitier could step out of his role and speak in his natural, measured voice, as if flipping a switch.
There are going to be people who say, no, that's not Mussolini, like there were people who said, no, that's not my...
Crew members said this difference sometimes caused friction during long shoot days. Steiger needed the emotional heat to stay alive between takes. Poitier needed the break to preserve his precision. By the time filming wrapped, the crew could see that the clash had left its mark, not in wounds, but in the final performance. The simmering undercurrent between them reflected in every shared scene. Here's the good part. In the end, their different approaches created a balance that made cinematic history. However, the tension between them weakened their relationship. Number 3. James Stewart.
Without using the device of acting.
James Stewart was more than just a Hollywood leading man. He was an institution. For decades, his easygoing charm and unshakable moral presence made him one of America's most beloved actors. From Mr. Smith Goes to Washington to It's a Wonderful Life, Stewart embodied the everyman with a quiet nobility that audiences trusted. He was not only a decorated war hero who served bravely in World War II, but also a consummate professional who kept his focus on the work itself, not the noise around it. Part of Stewart's enduring appeal came from his deeply held belief that the entertainment industry should remain separate from the volatile world of politics and social activism. To him, Hollywood's purpose was to entertain, inspire, and offer escape, not to become a stage for political battles. Colleagues remembered how he avoided public endorsements, steering clear of movements that could divide audiences. His approach was rooted in the idea that actors served the story, not the cause. It was this principle that brought him into quiet philosophical conflict with Sidney Poitier. By the 1960s, Poitier was more than an actor. He was a symbol of racial progress in America, using his roles and public voice to challenge stereotypes and confront the realities of segregation and discrimination. Poitier believed that, especially for a black man in Hollywood, every role carried political weight, whether one wanted it to or not. For him, the screen was not just a platform for entertainment, it was a battlefield for representation and dignity. And with every role and film he starred in, he ensured that activism was incorporated. When Stewart and Poitier found themselves in the same professional circles, their contrasting approaches were impossible to ignore. Observers recalled how Stewart would deflect conversations about race or politics, preferring to discuss cinematography, performance technique, or box office trends. Poitier, on the other hand, engaged openly on the subject, unafraid to connect the industry's decisions to the broader social climate. Some Hollywood insiders noticed moments of subtle friction when the two were in discussions about projects or industry issues. Stewart often emphasized the universality of storytelling, suggesting that films worked best when they transcended political divides. Poitier countered, in his measured and deliberate way, that for marginalized communities, the absence of political awareness in film was itself a political act, one that risked reinforcing the status quo. Their differences were never loud arguments, but rather quiet, firm divergences in worldview. Stewart would maintain his polite, affable demeanor, while Poitier's calm insistence gave his words the weight of lived experience. Those who observed them felt that Stewart saw activism as a distraction from the craft, while Poitier saw it as inseparable from the craft. Despite their opposing philosophies, there was mutual respect. Stewart admired Poitier's talent and discipline, and Poitier respected Stewart's commitment to his craft and his audience. Yet the gap between their beliefs reflected a larger tension in Hollywood, a divide between those who saw film as pure art and entertainment and those who saw it as a vehicle for social change. In the end, Stewart and Poitier stood as two pillars of their era, one steadfast in keeping the stage free of politics, the other equally steadfast in using that same stage to confront them. Poitier spoke openly about his disapproval of Stewart's position, and he never held back till the very end. Number 2. Rock Hudson.
It used to hurt, really hurt. You know, why? What have I done to deserve this?
Rock Hudson was, to the public, the perfect man. Standing 6'4", with movie star looks and an affable charm that seemed effortless, he was the embodiment of the mid-century Hollywood leading man. From the romantic highs of magnificent obsession to the dramatic gravitas of giant, Hudson's screen presence was magnetic. Studios sold him as rugged but gentle, strong but approachable, the dream of every fan magazine reader. Behind the glossy photos and public appearances, however, was a reality Hudson could never acknowledge publicly. He was a gay man living in an industry and a country where being openly gay meant career ruin. Hudson's sexuality was an open secret within certain Hollywood circles. Friends, trusted colleagues, and a few sympathetic journalists knew, but the information was locked away by a tacit code of silence enforced by the studio system. Publicists orchestrated faux romances with glamorous actresses, arranging photographs and interviews that reinforced his heterosexual image. In private, Hudson built a discreet network of companions and allies, navigating the shadows with the precision of someone who knew a single misstep could bring everything crashing down. In the 1960s, Hudson's world intersected with Sidney Poitier's. Poitier, already the most prominent black leading man in American cinema, was carrying a very different but equally heavy burden. For him, every role was political by default, whether he intended it or not. His portrayals were seen as statements about race in America, and he felt the responsibility to reject roles that demeaned or stereotyped black characters. Poitier's career was not just about acting, it was about representation, progress, and dismantling barriers. While both men faced immense societal prejudice, their strategies for survival in Hollywood could not have been more different. Hudson's approach was one of quiet concealment. He had learned to speak without revealing too much, to smile through intrusive questions, and to avoid any cause or conversation that might risk drawing attention to the truth he had to hide. Poitier's strategy, by contrast, was built on visibility and confrontation. He did not seek controversy recklessly, but he did not shy away from it either. He believed the platform of a successful actor came with a moral obligation to challenge injustice, even at personal cost. Observers within Hollywood and in social circles noticed the subtle friction between them. It was never hostility, more like an unbridgeable gap in worldview. Poitier, accustomed to using his public presence as a weapon against racism, sometimes saw Hudson's guardedness as a kind of capitulation to the status quo. He respected Hudson's talent and understood the unique risks he faced, but he struggled with the idea of deliberately avoiding truth in order to protect a career. Industry insiders recalled that their conversations rarely drifted into personal territory. Poitier was deeply thoughtful and liked to talk about the social implications of cinema. Hudson, ever cautious, preferred to stick to lighter topics: co-stars, production challenges, travel. Some speculated that Hudson feared Poitier's directness might draw him into political or social discussions he couldn't afford to be part of, discussions that could be dangerous in an era when even the whisper of homosexuality could end a career. There were moments, people said, when their differences became more visible. At industry gatherings, Poitier would speak confidently about the need for Hollywood to challenge harmful narratives, while Hudson would nod politely, offering non-committal remarks before redirecting the conversation. For Poitier, the separation of personal identity from public responsibility felt impossible. For Hudson, it was a necessity for survival. The 1960s offered no space for Hudson to be open, and Poitier strongly believed that Hudson could start a revolution but had chosen to hide. Hudson, in turn, admired Poitier's courage, even if he could not emulate it. In private, some close to Hudson claimed he envied Poitier's ability to be outspoken, to own his identity as a black man without fear of career-ending consequences. Poitier repeatedly stated that Hudson was a prisoner of Hollywood's unwritten rules, navigating the same treacherous system through secrecy. Their choices meant they would never fully see eye to eye. The quiet distance was real, and so, two of Hollywood's brightest stars moved through the same era, each carrying a truth the industry was not ready to accept, one by hiding it, the other by confronting it. Hudson paid a price for living in a world where being yourself could be the most dangerous act of all, and ended up in Poitier's blacklist. Number 1. Walter Brennan. Walter Brennan was one of the most decorated character actors in Hollywood history. With 3 Academy Awards for Best Supporting Actor and a career spanning over 4 decades, he was a fixture of American film and television. Known for his folksy voice, gap-toothed smile, and uncanny ability to inhabit old-timer roles, Brennan brought authenticity to westerns, war films, and small-town dramas. Audiences saw him as the embodiment of homespun Americana, a man who could just as easily be found telling stories on a porch as he could riding into a frontier town. But behind the warm-screen persona, Brennan carried beliefs that were far from welcoming. Away from the cameras, he was outspoken in his staunchly conservative and, at times, openly racist views. In a Hollywood that was slowly beginning to grapple with issues of race and inclusion, Brennan was unapologetically rooted in an older, segregated vision of America. Industry insiders whispered that he held deep suspicion toward the civil rights movement and expressed open disdain for the push toward racial integration, both in society and in the stories Hollywood told. It was in this issue that triggered the conflict when Brennan's path crossed with Sidney Poitier's. When Brennan and Poitier found themselves at the same events or on overlapping projects, observers sensed an unspoken hostility. Brennan's casual remarks about the old ways or his criticism of the civil rights protests did not sit well with Poitier. Those who knew Poitier recalled that he would not openly argue in public, but his silence in response to Brennan's comments was heavy and deliberate. Some crew members who worked around both men remembered moments of subtle tension. Brennan would make nostalgic references to a simpler America, the kind that, in reality, excluded people like Poitier from equal rights and opportunity. Poitier, while maintaining his composure, would disengage from the conversation entirely, making it clear he had no interest in validating such sentiments. Behind the scenes, people spoke about how fundamentally different they were, not just in personality, but in their vision of what America should be. Brennan valued tradition and resisted change, seeing Hollywood's growing diversity as a dilution of the country's heritage. Poitier believed the opposite, that change was the only path toward justice and that cinema could help lead the way. There were those in the industry who quietly defended Brennan, saying he was simply a man of his time, shaped by the rural America he came from. But for Poitier, such excuses rang hollow. He had spent his career pushing back against the very prejudices Brennan seemed content to preserve. While he didn't seek confrontation, Poitier did not hide his distaste. One colleague later remarked that Poitier's disapproval of Brennan wasn't theatrical, it was personal, grounded in a lifetime of encountering the same attitudes Brennan carried with pride. The tension between them was unmistakable. On set, they were professionals, each doing their work without incident. Off set, they kept their distance. People who witnessed them in the same room described the air as heavy, the conversations clipped. Brennan, for his part, seemed indifferent to Poitier's disapproval, while Poitier saw no reason to bridge a gap built on values he could not abide. In the end, the two men represented opposite poles of Hollywood's moral compass during a turbulent era. Brennan clung to a past that Poitier had spent his life breaking away from. Poitier's presence alone was a challenge to Brennan's worldview, a living, breathing example of the change Brennan resisted. For Poitier, Walter Brennan was not just another actor, he was a symbol of the very forces he had spent his life fighting against. What are your thoughts? Let's know in the comment section. Subscribe to this channel for more videos like this, like and share.